Peirce's fallibilism is often described as a contrite fallibilism, meaning that we can only make progress together as a community of dedicated investigators, that there will be many setbacks along the way, and our own part will at most be small. Following Peirce, pragmatists understand inquiry as a process that leads to a belief that is coherent with our experience, and thus is in a position to guide our actions. This method of inquiry is intrinsically self-correcting. Even though any appeal to a particular argument can change over time, the rationality of the process is not called into question. And this is the place where Richard Rorty really separated from Peirce. Rorty puts in question the rationality of the process of knowing reality. And then we come to a complete and absolute relativism. But that was never Peirce's stand. Like Rorty's truly bringing down all Peirce's arguments. For Peirce, inquiry involves several tasks. Evidence has to be collected, experiments have to be devised and carried out, dialogue must be engaged with fellow inquirers, decisions must be made about when we have scrutinized our opinions enough to trust our results. Even when this point is ever achieved, is a matter of discussion. It seems that Peirce believes that this point is never actually reached, as he explains that inquiry is not standing upon the bedrock of fact. It is walking upon a bog, and one can only say, this ground seems to hold for the present. Here I will stay till it begins to give way. And seen at first hand, these texts can make us very nervous because it shows somewhat a relativism or subjectivism. Here I will stay till it begins to give way. But wasn't that the way Newman lived? Wasn't Newman always open to see where our God will lead him? Lead kindly light, one step enough for me. And we're not talking about religious dogma. I'm going to address that a little bit further. I want us to come to a frame of mind for the conversations we have every day, from the way you organize your closet. Maybe you've reorganized it 30 times during the pandemic, or maybe that's something that women do, or the way you clean your car, or your opinion about the virus or the president. How much healthier our discussion would be if we said, here I will stay till my opinions begin to give way. Like if we weren't so cocksure about what we think and we were actually open for dialogue. Peirce develops his notion of inquiry as the road that goes from doubt to belief. Its starting point is a surprising experience that challenges an expectation. This surprising experience does not take place in a void, but within a settled body of beliefs, which serves as the context for the development of a specific doubt, or in Peirce's words, a real and living doubt. This implies that our body of beliefs can only be susceptible to doubt on a piecemeal basis, and we can regard it as true until a surprising experience causes a disruption. Peirce's characterization of doubt as specific versus the generalized Cartesian method of doubt is a significant claim of pragmatists, one that finds several resemblances in Newman's understanding. Peirce makes a genuine doubt relative to belief and argues that a person needs reason to doubt what he began by believing. We don't doubt just because, we need a reason to doubt. Understanding doubt as the detonator of inquiry in the context of previously held beliefs, Peirce sees it as a valuable asset in the quest for truth, since it stimulates us to inquiry until it is destroyed. Along with his recognition of the value of doubts, Peirce also recognizes the value of errors within inquiry. Peircean inquiry does not entail a systematic development of truth from one single premise. Rather, it results from weaving together diverse findings. And Dr. Snyder, if I may refer to the testimony you gave last night, that I think it was very edifying for all of us, how you talked about your personal experience of the faith. It's not that you believe because of that sister you had in grade school. It's not that you believe because of your undergraduate studies or your experience with one of the sacraments. It's all these experiences together that sustain our faith. That's Newman's notion of the ilative sense. And bringing it to our efforts for evangelization that I imagine we're passionate about in some way or the other. If we look for one single thread that will convert the whole world, I really don't think we'll find it. That's Jesus Christ. But we need to make him alive in a lot of different experiences. And this is what we need. And well, I see that I already changed a screen, and we can see for first, failures become one of the carcasses over which future generations of inquirers climb as they finally storm the fortress of knowledge. And it's just very reassuring to see that even our failures, our blunders, our missteps have a value. And this metaphor brings to mind Ratzinger's description of the history of dogma as a graveyard of heresies. I read that on my undergrad, well, Ratzinger discusses this in Introduction to Christianity, saying that the history of dogma, it's not a beautiful straight line that goes upwards, it's a graveyard of heresies. And how much we can believe from this, how much at peace we can be about how even mistakes or things that are not perfect help dogma develop. Now, for Peirce, both favorable and unfavorable outcomes are the threads in the cable of reasoning. Peirce wrote in 1868, reasoning should not form a change. I cannot read my screen, but you can. So a cable of fibers may be ever so slender, provided they are sufficiently numerous and intimately connected. So Peirce wrote this in 1868, and Newman has a very similar text from 4 years earlier, 1864. The best illustration of what I hold is that of a cable, which is made up of a number of threads, each feeble, insufficient in itself, but when it's put together in a cable, it represents an assemblage of probabilities, separately insufficient for certainty, but when put together, irrefragable. These texts were written 4 years difference. We know that Peirce knew the grammar of assent. Newman hadn't written the grammar in 1864. He published it in 1870. But as we know, he worked on it for over 30 years. So when I came to these texts, it was the eureka moment for my thesis. I realized that their understanding of reasoning is very similar. Although any of the fibers in the cable might break, all cannot. Since some of the fibers will hold, the cable is safe. And I think everyone that comes to faith, still has faith on their adult life. Some of the cables we had holding our faith, as perhaps, I don't know, the holiness of the clergy, that thread has been broken. But if there's many other threads, our faith will still remain strong. Everyone has the challenges that they go through. So we don't defend every single claim. We don't say that every single claim cannot not break, but faith is meant to stand on a much broader premise. With this understanding, both Newman and Peirce place fallibilism as an intermediate position between Cartesian dogmatism and outright skepticism. For Peirce, knowledge is fallibilist, meaning that one could always be wrong, but it is committal, meaning that one believes and acts upon her hypothesis. And Peirce's understanding of reasoning in these terms bears a great resemblance to Newman's ilative sense, as you can see in this text. Now, these two angles of Peirce's account of knowledge, fallibilism and commitment, are clearly discerned in Newman's life and works. Although he described a method of inquiry similar to Peirce's, Newman was more concerned with the attainment of truth than with the avoidance of error. John Crosby writes that Newman did not in first place see himself called to refute errors. He sought rather to make people realize the truths they were so fruitlessly professing. Traces of pragmatism can be discerned in Newman's emphasis on the realization of truth, which he explains in his idea as the capacity of the human intellect which discerns in lines and colors or in tones what is beautiful and what is not. It gives them a meaning and invests them with an idea. It gathers up a succession of notes in the expression of a whole and calls it a melody. It has a keen sensibility towards angles and curves, lights and shadows, tints and contours. It distinguishes between rule and exception, accident and design. It assigns phenomena to a general law, qualities to a subject, acts to a principle, and effects to a cause. This description of the path that the human mind follows in the process of inquiry is reminiscent of Peirce's call to consider conceivable effects. Those of you that are a little bit well-versed in philosophy, the pragmatic law is to consider the conceivable effects that our actions bear. Newman talks here about conceivable effects. Newman understands the benefits of inquiry and sees out as a positive step in the attainment of truth. We go back to this quote from the university sermon: if we're intended for great ends, we're called to great hazards. Whereas we're given absolute certainty in nothing, we must in all things choose between doubt and inactivity. Newman understands the pursuit of truth as a living process of continuous development, in which different pieces of evidence are examined and found to strengthen, interpret, and correct one another, and thus bring an idea closer to its perfection. He values antagonist principles and explains that they correct each other. We know that the historical development of dogma was very important for Newman, how he really converted after he studied the early councils of the faith. Commenting upon the definition of Christ's human and divine natures, he refers to the councils of Ephesus and Chalcedon, at which diverse statements were defined as true. Newman skillfully integrates both by concluding that the Second Council trimmed the balance of doctrine by completing it, and offers this example to give confidence that this is how our understanding of doctrine and truth will continue developing in the future. This cumulative understanding of knowledge is widely present in Newman's development of dogma. Now, he writes in his theological papers, "We are aware while we do so that words are inadequate. We can only remedy their insufficiency by confessing it. We can only set right one error by expression of another. Language is limited. Even though truth is absolute, truth doesn't change. We only have truth as expressed by ourselves. We can only set right one error by expression of another." Now we come to my 3 meanings of doubt. I see the time. I don't want to go faster, but I'll try to just click along. Newman's understanding of inquiry provides a context for this discussion on doubt. Newman speaks of doubt in several of his works and ascribes to it diverse meanings, among which 3 can be identified. The first meaning is the understanding of doubt in relation to doctrinal statements. The 2 examples he gives for this meaning are the existence of God and the divinity of Christ. Note how they are like very high theological truths. Understanding doubt in this particular context, Newman states that the Church does not allow her children to entertain any doubt of her teaching, because faith is incompatible with doubt. And I believe Dr. Snyder's presentation on doubt talked about this first meaning. He also uses this meaning in the Apologia when he says 10,000 difficulties do not make one doubt. But this is not the context for the discussion of my paper. A second meaning which Newman ascribes to doubt is that of complete skepticism. Dr. Snyder also made reference to this. In this regard, Newman says, "There are writers who seem to go far beyond reasonable skepticism, laying down as a general proposition that we have no right in philosophy to make any assumption whatever, and that we ought to begin with a universal doubt." As it has been shown, Peirce shares this criticism of the method of doubt brought forth by Cartesian rationalism. So Newman is not defending this. But Newman does admit that there's a reasonable skepticism, which introduces the third meaning. Newman, like Peirce, maintains that genuine doubt arises within a settled body of beliefs. He writes in the grammar, "Doubt itself is a positive state and implies a definite habit of the mind, and thereby necessarily involves a system of principles and doctrines." So he doesn't put in the question first principles, he doesn't put into question a worldview, but he says when doubts arise within that worldview, it's what allows faith to mature, knowledge to advance, and human beings to interact with the world. This understanding of doubt as a surprise within a settled body of beliefs is the third meaning which Newman ascribes to this term, and is qualified by Brandon Damm as Newman's normal use of doubt in his epistemological works. In the context of this paper, it is possible to identify the instance of doubt that Newman describes as a positive state with Peirce's genuine doubt, which leads to inquiry. Ian Kerr clarifies in the introductory essay he wrote for the 1985 Oxford edition of the Grammar that in this sense, doubt is not the same as the possibility of the loss of assent. Newman is aware of the liability of human reason. However, like Peirce, he believes that it's possible to advance towards truth. When Peirce talks about the process of inquiry, he refers to the community of philosophers, and Newman speaks of educated minds. In the case of educated minds, investigation is an obligation, or rather a necessity. Such a trial of their intellects is a law of their nature, like the growth of childhood into manhood. The intellectual sense in which they have like manner been instructed from the first have to be tested, realized, and developed by the exercise of their mature judgment. Note how Newman explains that ideas need to be tested, realized, developed. As Peirce upholds that the opinion, which is fated to be ultimately agreed by all who investigate, is what we mean by truth, Newman says that we are obliged under circumstances to bear for a while with what we feel to be in error, in consideration of the truth in which it is eventually to issue. The truth in which error is eventually to issue. Newman and Peirce uphold the objectivity of truth and maintain that it can be discovered through inquiry. Moreover, both acknowledge that many detours will be encountered during this process and do not see them as a negative circumstance. Newman sees them as a condition for success, saying that there is no intellectual triumph of any truth which has not been preceded by a full statement of what can be said against it. In his Apologia, Newman details the benefits of this process. I won't read this quote. Newman is saying, we have all these ideas, we hope they're true, we discuss them with our friends, we might either drop them or keep holding them for the future. We know Newman's work between his Anglican and Catholic periods, it was dedicated to the development of dogma, the development of truth. Then here I have a quote from the development of dogma that I'm pretty sure you know, so we won't read it. I'll read the first line so you remember. There will be a general agitation of thought and an action of mind upon mind. There will be a time of confusion, and then the ideas play with each other until I go to the end. Thus in time it will have grown, its complete image as seen in a combination of diversified aspects, with the suggestion and corrections of many minds and illustrations of many experiences. The pragmatic notion of inquiry holds errors as stepping stones towards the attainment of belief. As he accepts fallibilism as an inherent human condition, Newman also believes that truth and error are often found together, and that this is not an obstacle for truth. Error having always some portion of truth in it, and the truth having a reality which error has not, we may expect that when there is an honest purpose and fair talents, we shall somehow make our way forward. If my paper is something, it's like an apologia for debate, an apologia for discussion, to share ideas for others instead of shutting down the argument. And then Newman says, we can see here, in scientific research, error may be said without a paradox to be in some instances the way to truth and the only way. Newman is not afraid of errors. Now we come to our conclusion. As it can be seen for Newman and Peirce, the search for truth is not a straight path, nor is always luminous. Nevertheless, is ultimately fruitful. Both recognize the crucial role that doubt and error play in the pursuit of truth, and see them as building blocks in the edifice of knowledge. In this regard, Newman sustained that truth can only be discovered through a laborious process of inquiry, a thesis which finds ample resonance in pragmatism. Classical pragmatism, particularly the line of study that developed from the writings of Peirce, is compatible with a realist metaphysics and epistemology, and with a firm commitment to the truth. Further, it incorporates the liabilities of human reason, and offers substantial resources for the exercise of philosophy that can prove to be fruitful if undertaken with an open mind and a trusting heart. A commitment to the truth acknowledges that certainty does not result from the complete exclusion of every doubt, but rather from the accumulation of probabilities that when put together become irrefutable. A person who's committed to the truth admits to being challenged by others and by her own developments, and does not see in these questions a threat, but rather an opportunity for growth. This understanding of certainty as the accumulation of probabilities, which by their very nature admit doubt, is the basic idea behind Newman's ilative sense. To illustrate this principle, Newman used the image of a cord made up of a number of threads, each feeble in itself, but when bound together, sufficient as an iron rod. Being aware of the inherent limitations of human reason, and recognizing that in many instances, error might be the only way to truth that will eventually become clear, Newman invited his contemporaries to embrace doubt as a pathway to truth and not be disconcerted by detours in the process. Not only through his writings, but especially through his life, John Henry Newman provides a clear, valuable, and relevant testimony of a life that integrates the lights and shadows, doubts and certainties, dissonances and harmonies of our human existence, and remains firmly and joyfully committed to the truth. May his witness strengthen us to do the same. Thank you. So I